If you use a caravan or motorhome, then at some point you'll likely have an issue with your off-board water pump. But don't panic, as in this video I'll explain the likely causes and the fixes to get it going again. Hi, it's Dave T here, and whilst checking out the caravan for the start of the season last week, I found that the off-board water pump, the one in the Acroll here, wasn't working. To be honest, we've been caravanning for over 20 years, so this has happened before, but unusually there were several causes in this particular instance, so I thought I'd make a video running through how the system works, and when it's not working, what, in order of likelihood, is the cause and the solution. So just to start off with a quick explainer of how the water system on a caravan works. I'm going to be showing the Whale system used on my Bailey, but the Truma system, which is very popular, is very similar. Also, our system has both an onboard and an offboard tank, but I'll focus on issues with the offboard tank here, which is much more common to have. If you have an onboard pump, so that's where the pump isn't actually dangling into the Acroll, then some of these points won't apply. So the basic components of the water system are a water tank, which sits outside the van, and usually in the UK that's going to be an Acroll. Into this, a pump is then dangled on the end of a pipe lead, which is made up of both a water pipe and also a 12-volt electrical lead. The other end of this plug is then plugged into the van using a connector port on the side of the van. Inside the van there will be pipes that take the water from the other side of the wall here to the hot water boiler, the taps, and if you have one, to the onboard cold water tank. There will also be some form of switch to start the pump whenever you open a tap. Now on modern vans this is typically a pressure switch which operates when the pressure of the system drops as you open a tap. On older vans it can be a micro switch built into the tap itself. And on very old vans it can be a manually operated switch, like where you press a button or perhaps step on a pedal switch to actually operate the taps that way. Now because it's an electrical system there will also be a fuse, and there is usually also a switch to turn the pump system on. Now our switch actually has three options. You can turn the external pump on, the internal pump on, or both of the pumps off. Now, not forgetting there is also a master switch for the 12-volt system, and of course this is going to be powered by the leisure battery. So that's how the system should work. Let's look at the possible symptoms of when it's not working. So the first thing is if the pump is running but there's no water. So you can check for this by simply listening for the pump, and if you can hear the pump but there's no water coming through, that's this kind of issue. And the most common reason for this, where the offboard pump is running but not actually drawing water, is because the pump is failing to prime. But the first thing to check is that the tank is definitely full, and if it's only partly full then the pump is actually in the water. It's not curled up and is sticking back out of the water again. Now if it is definitely submerged in the water then the pump isn't priming, and pumps sometimes struggle to prime, and the most common cause for this is where water has not fully reached the impellers, that's the blades of the pump. This will usually be because there is some air trapped in the pump body or pipe. Now there's a fairly simple way around this, and that's to disconnect the pump from the side of the van here so that any air in the pipe can escape, and then simply lift the pump out and lower it into the water. And some people say to actually kind of lift it up and down so that you can help the water get into the pump body. I've never found that's particularly necessary to do, but it won't hurt. Once you've done that, then reconnect the pump to the van and try again and see if that solves the problem. Now if the pump is running but still not drawing water after definitely priming it, that could be that the pump is running too slowly. In which case, check that your battery level is high enough and turn off any other 12-volt devices to increase the power of the pump. Also, clean the terminals where the electrical connection from the outside unit meets this body here. And I'll cover that in the next section. The pump itself could also be damaged or failing, in which case a replacement pump is likely to be around £50 or so. So before running to a dealer, if you're on a caravan site, then ask a few of your fellow campers if they've got the same system, whether they would let you try and borrow this lead and plug it into your van to see if that's where the problem lies. It's also possible that there's a blockage in the pipe, either where it meets the van or further into the caravan, but that's beyond the scope of this video to fix. The second situation is where the pump is not running at all. Now, In that case, you're almost certainly looking at an electrical issue, but don't panic, as the likely fixes are still fairly simple. So the first thing to check to avoid any embarrassment later on is to check that your power is definitely on, and your battery level should be at least somewhere over 12 volts. Your pump switch should be set to on or external. Now the water system will usually have its own 12 volt fuse. On our Bailey, it's on the same circuit as the toilet flush, and it's a 5 amp fuse. Check the fuse hasn't blown, and if you're not sure about how to check the fuse, because it's a standard automotive fuse, you can visually check it by seeing if you can see the filament in the middle is still intact. Alternatively, if you have one, then you can check it with a multimeter to check the continuity on the fuse. And finally, if you've got a spare fuse, then just swap the fuse and see if that fixes it. That's worth pointing out, just swapping fuses, you don't really know if you fixed a problem or not because you didn't know if it was broken. So that's not the ideal, but if in doubt and you've got a spare fuse, just swap it. If the fuse has blown, then that's an easy fix, provided you have a spare fuse, but remember to still get another spare fuse, as it could well blow again. If it keeps blowing, then it's worth checking that the pump isn't failing, or check the other items in the list to see if they might cause it. So the most likely cause of the pump not running is the electrical connectors between the van and the pump lead itself. There are 2 copper strips on either side of the pump body and the corresponding copper strips on the connector housing. We have the whale pump, but the Truma pump shown in this picture is very similar, but with 2 copper blade connectors instead of the side connectors. These spend most of their lives outside, at least partly exposed to the weather, so can become corroded. You can clean these with some electrical connector cleaner spray if you have it, some light sandpaper if the corrosion is more severe, or at a push you can use a kitchen scrubbing pad, or even carefully scrape the surfaces with a sharp knife. Remember to clean both the connector on the pipe and also the van, and then retest. If the pump is still not running, then ideally you should get hold of a multimeter and check what voltage, if any, you are getting at the electrical connectors at the side of the van. If you don't have a multimeter, then I'd recommend you do actually get one to keep in the car or caravan, but you could also just again try asking some fellow campers to see if you can borrow their pump to test with. Now probably the last reason the pump isn't running is, and particularly if you're not getting any voltage at all at the connector point here, is that the pressure switch could well have failed or is not set correctly. Okay, so as I'm editing this, I've just noticed there's a slight omission, or it's not clear about a couple of points here. So this next section is about adjusting how the pressure switch detects the level of pressure in the system and therefore tries to turn on the pump. This is an unlikely thing to actually be the cause, but it is a possibility. So the first thing to do, and this is whether you're using a pressure-based system where the detects a drop in pressure, or as I mentioned earlier, the older type systems where it uses literally a micro switch built in to detect the tap as lifted, like that, or if you've got a more manual system where you have to literally press a switch to activate the pump, or foot switch, stuff like that, then usually there will be an LED which indicates when there is a demand for water, in other words, whether a tap's been opened. So if when you open a tap up, the pump doesn't run, but the light does come on, then it's not going to be an issue with the switch, regardless of the system. So that's the first thing to check. If you open the tap and the light doesn't come on, then it's going to be a problem with the switch. If it's that older type system, it could literally be the micro switch that's failed in the tap. So the best way to check that out is to just try a different tap. So if you're doing this on the kitchen tap, go and try the bathroom tap or the shower, something like that. If you've got a foot switch operated one, if you've got different foot switches, whatever, then try and see if one of those works and the other one doesn't. Then it could be just a fault with one particular tap switch. So if you've got a pressure-based switch system and the light doesn't come on when you open the tap, then it's highly likely to be the pressure switch. So with that said, we'll carry on with the video now, explaining about how to adjust that pressure switch, if you can fix it just by adjustment. The whale pressure switch has a dial to determine the pressure at which the pump turns on or off. Now if this is set too high, then the pump will run when it's not actually needed, and you may have noticed this occasionally, the pump kind of kicks in and then stops for no apparent reason. And if you do keep hearing that, that's a solution also, just to lower that setting. In the case of the pump not running, then it could be that it's set too low and then it's just not cutting in at all because it's not thinking that the pressure is low enough to actually trigger it. To be honest, this is probably the least likely reason for a pump not running, but it's still worth checking by turning the pressure all the way down, which is clockwise. Remember though that you will still then need to adjust back to the correct setting once the pump is fixed. You can do this by closing the taps and then turning the dial slowly until the pump stops running. Then test by opening a tap, and you will often have to kind of tweak the pressure setting to avoid that phantom pumping. Hopefully by this point you've solved the issue, but if not, then you may well need a new pump. It's worth bearing in mind though that pumps can potentially be repaired if, for example, the leads inside this unit here have broken or corroded. Also, it's possible to get individual components such as just the pump itself rather than the entire pump connector and hose and so on. And it's also worth shopping around because when I was researching this, there's a very wide range of prices when you try and buy these pumps. Either way, I hope you found this video helpful or at least interesting, and if you have, then please do hit that like button. If you're interested in seeing other videos I make, then please do subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon so you're notified of new videos. But most of all, thanks for watching.